I'm not a pedo, and if I was, you'd be safe, you tubby little ginger cunt.
Oh boy, this one curb stomped me right in the fucking feels, guys. In an ever-developing world where comedy is being given do's, don'ts, cans, and can'ts, Ricky Gervais has rarely cared.
I don't care anymore. I'm joking. I never did.
Personally, I haven't seen many of Ricky's other works other than his show The Office, which I only really watched out of a sense of obligation before I began watching the American adaptation, but I heard his latest show Afterlife was getting some buzz. 6 hours and 2 seasons later, and I found myself thoroughly enjoying it. The third and final season released this year, and due to some very personal events happening in my life, I felt a sense of moral duty to see how Tony's story ends and maybe gain some catharsis to help in what I was going through. For those who know nothing about the show, it's about a man named Tony who lost his wife to cancer, and we, the audience, are essentially watching his grieving process from his nihilistic attitudes, his dark, rude, and at times edgy comedic coping methods, and his inevitable lowest points when he feels like life has nothing to offer him. Tony works at a local newspaper company where he and some of his coworkers will go around town interviewing people with different quirks, talents, or interests. He often stops at his wife's grave where he talks to another woman who also lost her husband, sharing insight on their mentalities and viewpoints, just trying to help each other get through this traumatic and dark point in their lives. There's also an incompetent therapist he visits, a possible love interest whom he sees when he visits his dad in a nursing home, and a prostitute he befriends along the way. This show can be utterly hilarious while also not being afraid to gut punch you in the feels. Ricky Gervais does a splendid job acting in the show, delivering performances that feel very authentic while also being overall entertaining and humorous. The comedy is not very PC. There's a lot of disabled, pedo, trans, and suicidal jokes that absolutely would not get approved by some people of today's moral sensibilities.
Remember, they're just jokes. We're all gonna die soon, and there's no sequel. So,
one may wonder whether the only way he can get these jokes onto a platform at all would be to camouflage it as a somber mourning drama. However, I have no proof of this theory. Afterlife does a fine job of reflecting grief, tragedy, loneliness, and mourning. The show does its best not to focus on these concepts for too long, much like in real life. After all, when tragedy strikes, it's not always rain and gloom. You may walk outside your door the next day and hear "It's a Great Day to Be Alive" by Travis Tritt. In other words, life moves on. Whether or not you want to ride along with it is up to you. When the show decides to focus on the sorrow, however, it can absolutely hit just as hard as Saitama's series punch. Some of these scenes had me floored with their executions. My personal favorite scene, however, may be from season 2, when Tony's sitting with Anne, telling her about how he regrets not being stronger for Lisa while she was going through chemo. Ricky's acting is really good. Anne tries to comfort him, but it doesn't completely help him because what's done is done, and he will still carry that regret. Every scene with Anne is fucking adorable. Their conversations feel like advice grandma would give you if you were feeling down. She's laid back, relatable, and an overall sweetheart, always wanting the best for Tony even if she barely knows him. Wholesome just doesn't quite describe it. Emma, the nurse Tony sees when he visits his dad, is one of my favorite characters. Her relationship with Tony is basically the audience's. We'd like Tony to move on, to find happiness in another, but that's not what Tony's ready for. He's still in love with his wife and always will be. He even mentions how he feels like he's cheating on his wife in season 2. Of course, Emma can be the shoulder he leans on, but she has her own needs as well, and has to find her own happiness with or without Tony. It's easy to see this relationship as a by-the-books will they won't they. However, I think there's a little more to the dynamic, considering one of them is a widower carrying his grief alongside him, and the other is super relatable, wanting to be there for him but not quite knowing how. There's a lot of moments in this show, whether it's with Anne, Kath, Emma, or any of the other characters, that makes you reflect on your own life, how you can be a better person to those around you even when you're hurting, how to separate your own pain from the needs of other people's. Lessons that don't apply strictly to grief or mourning, but also loneliness or self-doubt. I love how serious the show tackles these topics. These are feelings us as humans all go through and deal with solemnly. However, the show doesn't steer away from making a laugh out of it, which is also very realistic. People who go through these sorts of feelings typically tend to joke about them, even if something more is going on under the hood.
And I feel like it is that unlikely combination of a very sad subject combined with comedy, which you don't always get very often. When writing it, is it quite difficult to get that balance?
Yes, it is. And, you know, you say you don't get it, but you don't usually get it on TV or sitcom, but you do get it in real life.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was worried initially when I first started writing it. I said, can they laugh after they've just seen this guy be suicidal and grieving about his wife dying of cancer? And the answer is yes. It depends how you do it, and I think you do it honestly. I think that's how you do it. You know, I made him angry and sad and lashing out, and that's funny. And I think we live vicariously through his candor.
The comedy can be really good at times. It definitely has some very natural moments, almost as if it were improv, where the characters are allowed to just be relaxed without being over the top or eccentric. I'm personally a fan of the crass humor that's been attempted by Ricky, from simply calling everyone around him a cunt, his casual pokes at his own state of mind, and the playful banter he shares with his colleagues at the Tanbury Gazette. It feels very natural. Most of the time, however, there are times when the comedy feels like The Office, where the characters operate like one or two-dimensional versions of themselves. June's a very blunt and loquacious mother, never hiding her real feelings about her son. Ken is very outlandish and egotistical, and Brian is a self-belittling beta male who's treated as such by the show until the third and final season. I feel like this tone can clash with the more dramatic and emotional plotline, which is Tony's mourning. Humans aren't typically caricatures of themselves. People have their extremes, however, people usually aren't this blunt, this rude, or this cartoonish. Then again, I don't know how you Brits operate over there in Cloud Country. The Office is able to pull off this type of comedy because it's consistent, not trying to sway back and forth from ridiculous and off-center absurdity to deep reflections of life, death, and loss. The Office can take itself serious enough, however, it's never in clash with the overall tone of the show. There's definitely an argument though that this show is for people in the grieving process, and these random Office-style skits are meant to be a distraction from the seriousness of mourning. However, I'd like to bring up a certain concept, a little term alcoholics like to call moderation. I think the ending of all the seasons are extremely fitting. Season 1 has Tony attempting to turn away from suicide, a very organic development away from his mentality in the first episode. Season 2 has Tony leaning back into those suicidal tendencies due to his father's passing, but my favorite is definitely Season 3, even if it feels incomplete. It's a solid cap off to the story we just watched, unlike some shows, and I found myself not wanting it to be over, but the show died before it could become the villain to its own theme, which is somehow, some way, we must carry on for ourselves and those around us. Now, onto some other things I did not enjoy about Season 3, or the show as a whole. Unfortunately, there are some scenes that feel extended, and don't add much other than padding out the runtime, which at times can be fine, but it can also feel like I'm dragging my feet through the show. The point of this scene in Season 2 is to show that Roxy is comfortable enough with Tony to just come into his house, but you don't need a 60-second Monty Python skit talking about what if he were naked. Is this some of that dry British humor you Muppets enjoy? If your goal is to not talk about mourning, but want a scene that establishes the relationship between these two, I think you can be a bit more creative than just talking about what if Tony were naked. This isn't necessarily a flaw, but personally, I would have had them talk about something different, like catch up on her work or what he thinks about it. Maybe they could talk about Julian rather than, imagine Ricky Gervais naked. Speaking of Roxy, I really missed her in Season 3. I love Roisin Connedy's portrayal of the prostitute Tony befriends, and she plays an important role in Tony's development through this hard time by being an earpiece. Someone other than Anne who he can talk to about his mourning, while also opening his eyes to the world around him and the struggles others have to go through. In Season 3, she's only mentioned in a few quick nods, mostly how she's still a prostitute, as if there was nothing else to her character. Like Tony gives away some of Lisa's life insurance money to Colleen, but not Roxy? The fuck? I also really missed Sandy in the final season. She added a lot of hopefulness to Tony's life, pushing him to step outside of his nihilistic ways in favor of her. She was that person that he didn't want to bring down to his level, even when he was feeling at his worst, and they just body replaced her with some other non-funny character. Colleen serves the exact same role as Sandy, except brought down to a similar level of pathetic as Brian. This absolute waste of time and space was not missed, however. Nothing he said was funny, nothing he said was insightful. He's used by the script as an earpiece as to where Tony and Matt are in their lives, but other than that, he's an absolute waste of a character. What a pathetic, abysmal cunt. I also noticed there are a few times where Lisa will forget whether Brandy is a boy or girl, even though her name is consistently Brandy. The cops in Britain must be fucking shit, because they aren't able to piece together that Tony gave Julian the money to buy the drugs to kill himself, but they also don't piece together that Tony threatened the tubby ginger kid with a hammer. Or this.
Don't overwater it. Cunt.
Jesus Christ, where's Nicholas Angel when you need him? Regardless of these issues, however, I thoroughly enjoyed the show. I'm glad the show decided to call it when it did rather than attempting to burlesque itself. The show isn't perfect, much like most things I'll be reviewing on my channel. It's somewhat of a mixed bag. However, if all shows were up to the quality that this show holds itself to, I'd be a happy tripod. It's a solid execution of a man's grieving process and how hard it may be for some people. Comedy's subjective, and even though it didn't hit me every time, I really appreciated the nihilistic aspects of the comedy, as well as the extraordinary insanity some of the interviews brought to the table. This show does a fine job of reminding you to hug your loved ones, tell them you love them, and try to be there for those going through hard times. That being said, I think I'll spare this one.